What do the Buffalo Bills look like at wide receiver and across the offensive line? We'll take a look at that this week on the Wandering Buffalo podcast. Get your hands on stylish t-shirts, hoodies, and more at wearbuff.com. That's WEARBUF.com. And make sure to use the promo code TWB at checkout for 20% off your first order. Stay Buffalo proud with Wear Buff.
You're now listening to the Wandering Buffalo podcast with your host, Justin Goddard.
All right, Bills Mafia. Welcome into another episode of the Wandering Buffalo podcast, a show on the Buffalo Fanbase Podcast Network. My name is Justin, and I am your host as always. And today we're going to be continuing the positional review series that we've been working on over the last couple weeks. And this week I wanted to get into the wide receiver room as well as the offensive line, and kind of works out perfectly because the breaking news across Bills Mafia right now obviously comes in the wide receiver room, and that came in the form of Khalil Shakir getting a contract extension. Super excited for this one. I didn't really have any doubts that it was going to get done, but you never really know until pen hits paper. And for me, this is kind of win-win-win all over the place. I think it's a good deal for Shakir. I think the Bills got him locked in early, and I expected it to be a little bit more in terms of the average annual value. I anticipated somewhere $18-20 million a year range. The average comes out as $15 million, $32 million signing bonus in there, 4-year contract extension for Khalil Shakir, and I think that's huge for this team. So 100 target receiver for the Bills last year, and honestly, I think of how many conversations we had after the Bills moved on from Cole Beasley about, we got to find that Beasley replacement. And I think we have that with even more athleticism in Shakir. He's tremendous after the catch. He makes difficult catches. He's got great hands. And I mean, what he's able to do with the ball in his hands after the catch is incredible. Looks like a pinball out there, and he's just not typically going down on first contact. I think what he brings to the team in terms of the ability to run wide receiver screens, just all kinds of things that he's able to do for this team. And I think you got him locked in at a good price tag. So number one right there off the board of somebody we were going to talk about this week, and what do we do with him? No questions asked there. If I had done this episode, a day or two earlier, I would have said, lock him in, get it done, because he's only going to get more expensive. And Brandon Beane didn't waste any time, got that deal done. The other wide receivers on this team currently under contract, Keon Coleman going into his second year, and I think there's a little bit of back and forth with Coleman right now, and kind of had a disappointing end to the season. And you throw in all the other storylines of, Worthy having some nice playoff performances and the trade back with the Chiefs there. And, like I said, the tail end of the season not really being great for Coleman. But I think overall he had a pretty solid rookie year, and something I don't want to get kind of lost in the mix of our expectations is this was another one of those Brandon Beane picks where he took a really young player that still had a lot of growing to do and kind of bet on the tools and upside. And we can have our debate on whether or not you like that strategy, whether or not it's the right strategy for, you know, this iteration of the Bills. You know, do we need to keep drafting 3-4 year project players when we're kind of in this win now window? That's a whole debate for another time. Maybe we'll do that episode. But I think we kind of talked about this being the tale of two seasons for Coleman. And before he went out with that forearm injury, he was right in the conversation with these rookie receivers that had great years. Your Ladd McConkeys, your Marvin Harrison Juniors. He was within like 30 yards of those guys before his injury. And I don't really know what happened coming back from that injury. Did he not feel right? Was it, you know, still sore, tender, something else going on? But he just wasn't the same after the injury. And we had kind of seen this progressive building of chemistry with Allen and Coleman, and it just kind of fizzled out. So he, for what it's worth, outplayed my expectations for his rookie year, especially with kind of those things in mind. And like I said, I think there's still a ton of ceiling to grow into for Keon Coleman. So I was encouraged by his rookie year. Excited to see what he can look like next year with a full off season working with Josh Allen, not doing all the weird combine stuff and, the rookie wall that you always hear about, all those types of things. I'm excited to see what it looks like in year two. Curtis Samuel, can't really say much other than it was a disappointing season for Curtis Samuel. And, kind of my fears of adding Curtis Samuel, while I was really excited about who he is as a player, my biggest concern bringing him in was the injury history that he's had. And we saw that kind of right out of the gate with the turf toe. He dealt with a couple other things throughout the year. And honestly, for being kind of the marquee signing of last free agency, honestly, last year was kind of all budget shopping, but that kind of being the big ticket, air quote that one, the big ticket item last offseason, it just wasn't up to my expectations. And, we saw throughout the season, Bills end up having to bring in another wide receiver. There's some injuries going on, and I think Curtis Samuel was kind of the plan to be like that 1A to Coleman's 1B, as Coleman started developing. And we really never saw him be too much more than like a role player. He did, come alive a little bit towards the end of the season, which, I mean, it's I kind of have similar thoughts here as I do for Coleman, but for, a player who's been in the league for several years. And for me, I'm excited to see what it looks like with, hopefully another healthy offseason with some more time on task with Josh Allen, another year in the system. And I think all you can really hope for here is health and see where it goes from there, because he didn't forget how to play football. He had, his best season with Joe Brady, and just the fact that they weren't able to get him going most of the year had me really scratching my head for most of the season. He's not going anywhere. The contract's not, easy to move away from, anything like that. Curtis Samuel will be back in the building next year, and just hopefully we're able to get closer to the upside of what I was expecting out of him. And there was a ton of conversation in the offseason last year about, like how much he lines up in the backfield and how many carries is he going to get, and him being this gadget guy and jet sweeps, and I feel like we didn't really see any creativity with him, any of that, really all that extra stuff that we thought might be factors for him. We didn't really see much of any of it. So I'm excited for Joe Brady to have some time to, you know, take another look at what the offense looked like last year and find different ways to incorporate him into this mix. And rounding out the group, we have some of the practice squad guys. KJ Hamler's been around for a while. We saw a little bit of Jalen Virgil and Tyrell Shavers last year. I think those two in particular, they have, some intrigue. Obviously, Shavers had that screen pass that he took to the house. These are the types of dudes that we always seem to have on this team, the fringe roster receivers. They have awesome, preseasons, training camps, and maybe one of them, gets a chance and is able to put something together and solidify themselves on the roster. I'm going to be viewing them mostly as fringe roster guys for right now, and not really answers or solutions to if you need to bring anybody else in. Which brings us to two expired contracts, and the first one being Matt Collins. And this was a dude for me that kind of had me flip-flopping all over the place. I was super excited about the signing, the leadership he brings, the special teams ability, being a fourth, fifth wide receiver that, is a big body guy, can do some blocking stuff. Then the season started, dealing with some injuries, and Keon Coleman is this bright young rookie, and the offense just isn't really moving, and Hollins is essentially operating as the team's number one, and those were tough times. It, for me, ends up being, adjusting expectations and who Matt Collins is supposed to be for this team. And when he was able to kind of settle into that more specialized role, he was one of my favorite players on the team. And for me, becomes kind of a priority re-signing. And like the team's not going to fall off a cliff if you're not able to bring him back. But you're talking about a guy that's been around the league for a while. It's not going to be some break the bank contract. It's going to be a very reasonable deal. And I just think for how versatile and valuable he was to the offense, it's worth bringing him back at least another 1 to 2 years. I mean, this guy was playing inline tight end, helping blocking for in the run game. He's physical blocker in the run game on the outside. We saw him make all kinds of clutch catches with Josh Allen, and he's not going out there putting up 10 catches, 150 yards, and 2 touchdowns every week. But there was some weeks where he had like one catch and it was a 15-yard touchdown. And it was in a key moment, and he was able to come away with the play. He also, for being one of the older players on this roster, seemed to be the only, I don't want to say the only, like the player most consistently able to connect on a deep ball from Josh Allen. And I mean, that's saying something because he's he's not out there with 4.3 speed. So love Matt Collins for who he was on the field. This isn't even getting into, the interesting character he is off the field for that extra little entertainment value. He's a player that, like I said, I was excited about. I was down on down on for a bit, and he just became, one of those awesome personalities that's really hard to root against. And then last on this list, Amari Cooper. And what to do with Amari Cooper? I've gone back and forth on this a bit. And for starters, his contract's expired. He's set to be a free agent. And the Bills need to make a decision on whether or not to bring him back. And I like what Amari Cooper brought to this offense last year. I think we saw, like you said, the offense was having its struggles, and Amari Cooper comes in and things start clicking a little bit more. And it wasn't like, you brought him in midseason to be the Diggs replacement that you never got, and you just started funneling tons of targets to him. It was he flowed nicely into the everybody eats philosophy, and I feel like he fit right in. He made the whole offense better, whether or not it was like through his own production. So that part of the conversation makes me feel like I'd be down to have him back. I think he's still a great route runner. There's still a lot that he can bring to the table. But then you get to the conversation where he is entering his age 31 season. He is probably going to get a pretty sizable deal. And now you're getting into the conversation of you've just invested in Shakir. Do you want to talk another, what, 15, $20 million on Cooper? Proven NFL talent. He's going to get a pretty good sized deal somewhere. And I just don't know that I have the appetite for extending an aging receiver. I think he was great at times last year, but it's not a spot that I'm feeling any sort of urgency to give out a big paycheck there. And furthermore, I feel like the additions that need to be made to this room aren't necessarily that type of wide receiver. I think this offense is kind of lacking in the dynamic speed, vertical, horizontal threat guys. And if we're going to pay like proven veteran talent, I think I would lean more towards wanting to do that and maybe bring in somebody that's on a little bit more of a budget contract and revisit this in the draft and continue getting younger and cheaper and find answers to build around Allen with for kind of like we talked last offseason about this kind of being like the reset year to set Josh Allen up for the rest of his career. I want to see some young guys come in now that can be with Josh Allen for quite some time. So, love Amari Cooper. He's a great player. I think he was great with the team last year. If it was me making the decisions, I would probably move on there. Moving into the offensive line, this is so fun for me to talk about and such a super easy conversation because I don't think you really have to do much of anything with the offensive line. Maybe, you know, sign a couple young guys, maybe make a couple investments in the draft to continue building out depth. But I think going back to last offseason, the big decision was, moving on from Mitch Morse, and there was question marks there. We're shuffling the line around, you're changing leadership, you're removing another cornerstone piece, and all of that on top of it, it was like the best offensive line we've ever seen in front of Allen. And I wasn't super comfortable with going ahead and making changes there. And well, this past season happens, and offensive line was every bit as good, if not better. And we're in a great spot here. Everybody across that line is under contract going into next season. I think you saw kind of fruits of Brandon Beane's labors, whatever, come to fruition, and taking a bet on Spencer Brown and extending him early and getting him locked in. That looks like a steal of a contract already. Deion Dawkins on the other side, just been constantly a really good tackle, protecting the blind side. Love his personality. He's awesome on the field. He's not showing any signs of aging. McGovern's transition to center, I thought, went spectacularly. I didn't see any ball security issues. I didn't see any, protection issues coming up. You drafted a young guy in Osiris Torrance. He had another good year. And then that leads me to the only real question that we have, and that's what to do with David Edwards. And the only reason I bring this up is because there is cap savings to be had here, and this is really the only guy that you could tinker with. And it's something like you could save $4 million against the cap if you cut or trade him, and you could also save like $2 to $3 million if you chose to extend him. And this spot I think is interesting because of the depth that we've built out in this room. And on offensive line, honestly, not the sexiest, most fun position groups to talk about. But for being a fan of the team, like not only am I like super excited about who our starters are, like I'm over here giddy about what our second line looks like. Ryan Vandermark kind of took over last offseason as the swing tackle. Alec Anderson being that sixth man, he's been super effective in that role. You have Tylen Grable that we drafted last year in the late rounds, and going into last season, he kind of won that starting job or the swing tackle job from Vandermark. Ends up getting hurt. When he comes back, he kind of took that job again. And then Cedric Van Pran Granger, also in the mix, also a draft pick from last year. So, I mean, that's 3-4 dudes there that could be reasonable starters. And I think it's just a conversation worth having when you're talking about, all these kinds of extensions that are coming up for the Bills. When you have, yes, we locked in Shakir, but we still have to have a conversation about Terrell Bernard, Christian Benford, James Cook. There's conversations to be had there. And is there a spot where is it a spot where you're ready to make the jump to one of these younger guys and give them a role? Or are you just going to kind of keep letting them develop? Because, I mean, it's not like we have anybody that's particularly old across this offensive line that, they just have to wait like one more year till their time comes. They're all going to be waiting in the wings for a bit. So I think that's an interesting conversation to have. Again, I'm in a very similar space to where I was with Mitch Morse going into, last offseason of like, I have a hard time really thinking about, should we start tinkering with this offensive line because they were so good already? And this is not an area where I will pretend to be an expert or anything of that nature. I do know that Aaron Cromer is regarded as, one of the best offensive line coaches in the league. And I guess if I was in the position of power, I'd maybe just defer this decision to him. Like, you think these guys are ready to go? We can save some money. I think an interesting layer to this is also when Aaron Cromer came over from the Rams, the only player that he brought with him was David Edwards. So maybe it's easier in this chair to Be like, yeah, we got guys waiting in the wings. Get rid of them. Probably some sort of personal relationship there. And I know it's got to be business first, but there's really no urgency to move on from him. It's not like you're getting 20 million freed up in cap. It's 4 million. It's not nothing, but it's also not, a crazy value. So I think that's an interesting thing to keep an eye on. And I would say if I was trying to be predictive, I wouldn't go the route of an extension, but I wouldn't feel urgency to move on from him. I think these guys that you got waiting can continue developing as depth. We've also had, knock on wood, tremendous health across the offensive line for the past couple of years. You have great depth there if something does happen versus, saving a few bucks right now and depleting into that depth a little bit. So worth talking about. We'll see what happens. I think that'll be one of the like low key more interesting position groups to, I guess, just position to watch as we move through the off season. But that wraps it up on the offensive side of the ball. Going into next week's episodes, probably going to be a little bit longer episodes. I'm going to take bigger bites out of this. I want to kind of start getting wrapped up as free agency is right around the corner. Might be a couple bonus episodes in there. I know we have one lined up with I'm going to be a guest on another show, and we're going to release that over here as well. So make sure you're subscribed for that. We also have Jake working on some smaller videos. We have Jake and Mike, myself, all working on articles on the website. We got the merch up there. Got all kinds of stuff going on this off season. So do all the things for us. It makes it way easier to keep the episodes coming out every week. Drop a like, drop a comment. Let me know what you think about the wide receivers. Let me know what you think about the offensive line. Let me know if you got some draft thoughts, because that's right around the corner too. Do all the things. We appreciate it. And like I said, it helps us keep the show coming every week. But that's going to do it for this week's episode. Next week, like I said, we're going to start getting into the defensive side of the ball and start working towards free agency. Until then, and as always, go Bills.